Some moments in life split your world into before and after. For me, that moment came on a blazing hot Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix when I found a manila envelope tucked behind my father's old tax files. Inside were documents that would unravel 28 years of what I thought was my family's love and reveal a truth so devastating it would force me to rebuild my entire identity from scratch. My name is Alexandra Chen, but everyone calls me Alex. I'm 28, marketing analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown, and up until 3 months ago, I believed I was the responsible daughter in a loving, if slightly dysfunctional family. I lived in a converted loft in downtown Phoenix, drove a sensible Honda Civic, spent most weekends helping my parents with their construction business, or hiking the desert trails with my boyfriend Marcus. I was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, organized family dinners, and always showed up when someone needed help moving furniture or fixing a computer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Chen family had always been built around my grandfather William's legacy. Grandpa Bill, as we called him, immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with nothing but a toolbox and an unshakable work ethic. He started Chen Construction in a tiny garage in South Phoenix, and over 30 years, he built it into one of the most respected commercial contractors in Arizona. Shopping centers, office buildings, even parts of Sky Harbor Airport bore his craftsmanship. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left behind a business worth millions and a trust fund that was supposed to secure his grandchildren's futures. Growing up, I always knew there was money set aside for me and my younger brother Tyler. Grandpa Bill used to tell us stories about the buildings he'd constructed while bouncing us on his knee, always ending with his favorite phrase, hard work. Builds more than walls, little ones. Builds character, and character builds legacy. The trust fund was part of that legacy, a way to ensure his grandchildren could pursue their dreams without the financial struggles he'd endured. Tyler and I couldn't have been more different. While I excelled in school, graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State University, and immediately dove into building my career. Tyler was what my mother, Linda, diplomatically called creatively inclined. He dropped out of community college after 2 semesters to pursue music, spent most days sleeping until noon, and most nights playing guitar in dive bars around Tempe. At 25, still lived in his childhood bedroom, complete with the same Batman posters from middle school and a growing collection of expensive music equipment that somehow appeared despite his lack of steady income. My parents, Bob and Linda Chen, had always treated our differences as complementary rather than problematic. Bob, who'd taken over the construction business after Grandpa Bill's death, would shake his head at Tyler's late nights, but still slip him cash for gas money. Linda, a school administrator who managed budgets all day, somehow never questioned how Tyler afforded his latest guitar or the studio time he was always booking. Tyler marches to his own drummer, she'd say with a fond smile, but Alex keeps us all in line. I loved my family, and if being reliable meant Tyler had the freedom to chase his dreams, then so be it. I helped Dad with business paperwork on weekends, co-signed Mom's school fundraisers, and even co-signed Tyler's car loan when his credit wasn't quite good enough. When Grandpa Bill died, I naturally stepped into the role of family organizer, handling funeral arrangements and helping sort through decades of business documents and personal papers. That's how I ended up in my parents' home office that scorching Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago. Dad had asked me to help organize some old financial records for the accountant. "You're so good with details, honey," he'd said over lunch the previous Sunday. "Would you mind spending a few hours going through those old file cabinets? I keep meaning to digitize everything, but you know how I am with technology." The office was a shrine to both Grandpa Bill's success and Dad's continuation of the family business. Framed photos of completed construction projects lined the walls. Interspersed with family pictures and Dad's contractor licenses, the massive oak desk that had belonged to Grandpa Bill dominated the room, its surface perpetually covered with blueprints, invoices, and the kind of organized chaos that somehow made sense to construction minds. I'd been sorting through Manila folders for about 2 hours, creating neat piles of tax documents by year. When I reached for a folder wedged behind the others, the label had been smudged, making it difficult to read. but as I pulled it free, several documents scattered across the desk. Most were old insurance papers and warranty information, but one envelope caught my attention. It was cream-colored, heavier than regular paper, with private and confidential stamped in red across the front. My heart started beating faster. As I recognized the letterhead Morrison, Patterson and Associates, the law firm that had handled Grandpa Bill's estate. The envelope was addressed to my father and dated just 6 months after Grandpa Bill's funeral. I hesitated for a moment, knowing I probably shouldn't open someone else's legal mail, but curiosity and a strange sense of unease won out. Inside were copies of trust fund documents, revised will amendments, and a cover letter from Catherine Morrison, the estate attorney. The first paragraph made my hand shake. "Dear Mr. Chen, per your request, we have amended the William Chen Family Trust to reflect the changes discussed in our meeting. As outlined, the full $2 million trust fund will now be designated solely for Tyler Chen, with Alexandra Chen's portion being redistributed accordingly." I read the sentence 3 times before its meaning sank in. Then I read the attached documents, which laid out in cold legal language how my inheritance had been systematically transferred to my brother. The original trust, established when Tyler and I were children, had designated $1 million for each grandchild. No, but according to these papers, signed by both my parents as co-trustees, that had been changed. Tyler would receive the entire $2 million on his 30th birthday, while I would receive nothing. The reasoning, according to a handwritten note in my father's familiar scrawl stapled to the back, was brutally simple. Tyler needs financial security due to his artistic pursuits and uncertain income potential. Alexandra has demonstrated strong earning capacity and financial responsibility, making her less dependent on inheritance support. I sat in that leather chair, surrounded by the evidence of my family's success, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about money, though $2 million was certainly life-changing. This was about being erased from my grandfather's legacy. It's about being deemed unworthy of the inheritance he'd specifically intended for both his grandchildren. This was about my parents deciding that my responsibility and success disqualified me from the same support they lavished on my brother's irresponsibility. But what came next would shatter even that devastating discovery. As I sat there, numb and trying to process what I'd found, I heard my parents' voices coming up the driveway. They were returning from lunch, and their conversation carried clearly through the open office window. "I still think we should tell Alex eventually," my mother's voice said, tinged with guilt. "Tell her what?" Dad replied, his tone sharp. "That she was never really our son? We always planned to give everything to Tyler because he's our actual child?" My blood turned to ice. I could barely process what I was hearing. "Bob, don't say it like that," Mom protested weakly. "We love Alex, but Tyler is our biological son. Adoption was different." The word hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the desk as 28 years of my life suddenly took on a completely different meaning. Every family photo, every holiday, every time I'd looked in the mirror and wondered why I looked different from my parents and brother, every moment I'd attributed to natural family variation now had a devastating explanation. I wasn't their biological daughter. I was adopted, and apparently, that made me less deserving of the inheritance Grandpa Bill had established for his grandchildren. The grandfather who'd taught me about hard work and character, who'd bounced me on his knee and called me his little architect, who died believing he was providing equally for both his grandchildren, had been betrayed by his own son. As I heard my parents' footsteps approaching the front door, I quickly photographed every document with my phone, turned them to their hiding place, and arranged the remaining files to look like I'd been working when they walked into the office. 5 minutes later, I was calmly organizing tax receipts, though my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the papers. "How's it going, sweetheart?" Dad asked, settling into his desk chair as if he hadn't just destroyed my entire understanding of who I was. "Almost finished," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just a few more folders to go through." Squeezed my shoulder affectionately. "You're such a good daughter, Alex. We're so lucky to have you." The irony of her words, spoken just preparing and narrating this story, took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The discovery phase was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of careful observation and mounting horror. I went through the motions of my normal life, showing up to work, maintaining my weekend routine, of helping at the construction office, joining family dinners at my parents' house in Scottsdale. But now I was watching everything through a completely different lens, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Every interaction became a case study in deception. When Tyler showed up to Sunday dinner in a brand new leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent, nobody questioned where the money came from. When he casually mentioned booking time at a professional recording studio in Tempe, Mom and Dad exchanged knowing looks but said nothing. Meanwhile, when I mentioned needing new tires for my Honda, Dad suggested I shop around for the best deals and maybe consider getting them retreaded to save money. The double standard was so glaring I couldn't believe I'd missed it for years. Tyler's expensive equipment, his frequent trips to Los Angeles for networking events, his designer clothes, the fact that he never seemed to worry about money despite having no steady income, it all made sense now. My parents weren't just enabling his lifestyle. They were funding it with the knowledge that he'd soon have access to $2 million. They were investing in their real son's future while expecting their adopted daughter to fend for herself. I started paying closer attention to family conversations, and the casual cruelty became impossible to ignore. During one dinner, Tyler mentioned wanting to buy a vintage guitar from a shop in Nashville. The price tag was $8,000, an amount that would have taken me months to save. "That's a significant investment," Mom said thoughtfully. "But if it's going to help your music career, we can make it work." Dad nodded in agreement. Music equipment holds its value, and you need professional-grade tools to compete in the industry. I nearly choked on my water. 2 months earlier, I'd asked my parents if they could help me with a down payment on a small condo I'd been looking at. The monthly payments would have been less than my current rent, and building equity seemed like a smart financial move. Dad had given me a long lecture about the importance of financial independence and suggested I wait until I'd saved the full down payment myself. "You're so responsible with money, Alex," he'd said. "You don't need to rush into homeownership. Take your time and do it right." But Tyler's $8,000 guitar was a career investment that deserved immediate family support. The more I watched, the more I noticed how they spoke about our futures. Tyler's music career was always discussed in terms of when he'd make it big, not if. When Tyler's album takes off, or when Tyler signs with a major label, or when Tyler moves to Nashville. My career, despite being stable and successful, was treated like a placeholder. "Alex has a good job," they'd say, as if marketing analysis was just something I did to pass time rather than a profession I'd worked hard to excel in. Even more painful was watching how they discussed my grandfather's legacy. During one particularly devastating conversation, I listened from the kitchen as Dad explained to Tyler why the trust fund changes had been necessary. "Grandpa Bill built this business for the family," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "He always talked about keeping it in the bloodline, about passing down what he'd built to his real descendants. Alex is wonderful, and we love her, but she's not actually his granddaughter. The money should go to someone who carries the Chen name authentically." Tyler, to his credit, sounded uncomfortable. "Alex has done way more for the business than I have. Knows all the financial stuff, helps with the paperwork, actually understands construction." "Are you sure this is what Grandpa would have wanted?" "Your grandfather was very traditional about family lines," Dad replied firmly. "And Alex has her own path. She doesn't need the money the way you do. She's always been self-sufficient." Self-sufficient. The word became a knife that twisted every time I heard it. I was self-sufficient because I'd had to be, because I'd learned early that my place in this family depended on being useful rather than being loved unconditionally. I was self-sufficient because they'd raised me to be the helper. It's the organizer, the one who solved problems rather than creating them. And now my self-sufficiency was being used as justification for cutting me out of my inheritance. The breaking point came during a family barbecue at their house 3 weeks after my discovery. Extended family was there, my Uncle Marcus, some family, friends, neighbors from their gated community. Tyler was holding court by the pool, telling everyone about his latest gig, and his plans for a music video. He'd clearly had a few beers and was more animated than usual. The thing about being an artist, he declared to a small audience of relatives, is that you can't compromise your vision for money. Some people are built for corporate life, for climbing ladders and playing politics. But real artists we need freedom to create. He gestured broadly, nearly spilling his beer. Like my sister Alex, she's amazing at that business stuff. Loves spreadsheets and meetings and all that. But I could never live that way, being trapped in some office all day. That's why it's so important that I have the trust fund to fall back on. It means I can focus on my music without worrying about paying rent or whatever. The casual way he mentioned the trust fund, as if it was common knowledge, hit me like a physical blow. He'd known all along that he was getting my share of the inheritance, and he talked about it like it was his natural right. Several family members nodded approvingly, murmuring about the importance of supporting artistic endeavors and how lucky Tyler was to have such understanding parents. Uncle Marcus, Dad's younger brother who worked as an accountant, raised his beer in a mock toast. Here's to Tyler, living the dream while the rest of us slave away in cubicles. Everyone laughed, including my parents. I stood by the outdoor kitchen, holding a plate of potato salad and watching my family celebrate. My brother's good fortune with money that had originally been intended for both of us. Money that my grandfather had specifically set aside for his granddaughter too, even if she wasn't blood-related. That's when I decided I'd heard enough. I needed proof, real evidence of what my parents had done and why they'd done it. More importantly, I needed to understand exactly what my grandfather had intended when he established the trust. Had he known I was adopted? Had he specifically included me anyway, only to have his wishes betrayed after his death? The next day I called Catherine Morrison's law office and scheduled a consultation. I didn't mention that I was Bob Chen's daughter. Simply said I had questions about a family trust and needed legal advice. When I met with her the following week, I brought copies of the documents I'd photographed, along with a timeline of events and my own questions about the trust's original structure. Catherine Morrison was a sharp woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that comes from dealing with family drama for decades. She reviewed my documents carefully, asked pointed questions about my relationship with my grandfather, and requested additional information about the original trust establishment. "This is highly unusual," she said, after reviewing everything. "I remember your grandfather well, and I specifically remember him insisting that both grandchildren be treated equally in the trust. He was very clear that family meant more than blood relation to him." She pulled out a thick file from her cabinet to keep detailed notes on all estate planning meetings, especially when clients have strong feelings about their wishes. "Your grandfather mentioned you specifically during our initial consultation. Said Alex might not share my DNA, but she shares my values. She understands what hard work means, and she deserves the same opportunities as Tyler." The words hit me like a wave of validation and grief. Grandpa Bill had known about the adoption, had specifically chosen to include me equally, and had trusted my parents to honor his wishes. They'd waited until he was gone, and then betrayed everything he'd wanted for my future. Catherine continued reading from her notes. He was particularly concerned that the trust not be used to enable dependence. He wanted both grandchildren to have opportunities, but he also wanted them to earn their place in the family business. He specifically mentioned that Alex had shown real aptitude for the business side of construction, and that he hoped she might take on a larger role as she got older, sat in that law office, surrounded by leather-bound books and legal diplomas, and finally understood the full scope of what had been stolen from me. Not just money, but my grandfather's vision for my future, his recognition of my potential, his desire to see me take on a meaningful role in the family legacy. My parents hadn't just redistributed an inheritance, they'd erased my grandfather's wishes and replaced them with their own prejudices about blood relation and family authenticity. "What are my options?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Legally, you have several avenues. Trust modification requires unanimous consent from all beneficiaries, which means you should have been consulted and agreed to any changes. The fact that you weren't even informed of the modifications is grounds for challenging the entire amendment." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "However, family litigation is emotionally devastating and expensive. Before we discuss legal action, I have to ask, what outcome are you hoping for? Do you want the money restored to its original distribution, or are you looking for something else?" The question forced me to confront what I actually wanted. Is this about the money, or was it about justice? Was I seeking financial compensation? Or was I trying to honor my grandfather's memory and expose my parents' betrayal? "I want them to face consequences for what they've done," I said finally. "I want Tyler to understand that his good fortune came at my expense. And I want my grandfather's real wishes to be honored, not the version my parents created to justify their favoritism." Catherine nodded approvingly. "And we'll start with a formal demand letter. We'll notify your parents that you're aware of the trust modifications and that you're demanding full disclosure of all changes made since your grandfather's death. We'll give them 30 days to provide a complete accounting and to explain their legal justification for the modifications." She handed me a business card. "In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Every conversation about money, every comment about the trust, every instance where Tyler's expenses are covered by your parents. If this goes to court, we'll need to establish a pattern of favoritism and demonstrate that the trust modifications were based on discrimination, rather than legitimate financial planning." I left that meeting with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since discovering the documents. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just a victim uncovering betrayal. I was someone taking action to right a wrong. The scared, confused daughter was evolving into someone who refused to be erased from her own family's story. That night, I started a detailed journal of every interaction with my family. Every financial double standard, every casual mention of Tyler's future versus my own. I was building a case, but more than that. I was finally standing up for the granddaughter my grandfather had believed in, even if her own parents had decided she didn't deserve his legacy. The demand letter arrived at my parents' house on a Wednesday morning in October. I knew this because I was sitting in my car across the street from their Scottsdale home, watching the mail carrier deliver what would become the first domino in a chain reaction that would destroy everything they thought they knew about family loyalty and consequences. I'd spent 2 weeks meticulously documenting every instance of financial favoritism, every casual conversation about Tyler's future, every dismissive comment about my supposed self-sufficiency. Catherine Morrison had been thorough in preparing the legal documentation. She'd also been clear about what would happen once my parents received formal notice that their secret was exposed. Family dynamics change permanently once legal papers get involved. She'd warned me during our final preparation meeting. "There's no going back to the way things were. You need to be absolutely certain you're ready for the fallout." I was ready. More than ready. I was tired of being the dutiful daughter who smiled through family dinners while my inheritance was casually discussed as Tyler's rightful property. I was exhausted from pretending that their version of love, conditional on my usefulness and diminished by my adoption status, was enough for me. The call came 3 hours after the mail delivery. I was at work, analyzing consumer data for a new campaign, when my phone buzzed with my father's contact information. I let it ring twice before answering, wanting to sound calm and professional. "Alex, we need to talk." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the underlying panic. "Can you come over tonight after work? Is everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew exactly what had triggered this sudden urgency. "Just come over. We'll discuss it then." The line went dead. No goodbye, no usual pleasantries, just the abrupt dismissal of someone who was used to controlling conversations and situations. For the rest of the afternoon, I found it impossible to concentrate on spreadsheets and market research. My mind kept wandering to what awaited me at my parents' house. What explanations they'd attempt. What justifications they'd offer for years of systematic deception. I arrived at their house that evening, armed with printed copies of every document Catherine had obtained, along with my own detailed notes about family conversations I'd witnessed. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual for my security-conscious parents. I found them waiting in the living room like a tribunal, preparing for an interrogation. Mom sat on the edge of the leather sectional, her hands clasped tightly. In her lap, Dad stood by the fireplace. One arm braced against the mantel, in what I recognized as his power stance from difficult business negotiations. Tyler was conspicuously absent, though his absence felt more strategic than coincidental. "Sit down, Alexandra." Dad's use of my full name was deliberate, formal, designed to create distance between us. I remained standing. I think we both. "Know why I'm here?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The question is whether you're going to be honest about what you've done." Mom's face crumpled slightly. "Honey, you have to understand. We never meant for you to find out this way. We were planning to explain everything when the time was right." "When would that have been exactly?" I asked. "When Tyler turned 30 and received the entire trust fund. When I started wondering why my grandfather's legacy had somehow bypassed me completely. Or were you planning to take that secret to your graves?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic, Alex. This isn't about excluding you or playing favorites. This is about practical financial planning and understanding family obligations." The word obligations hung in the air like a challenge. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, setting it on the coffee table between us. "I want to make sure I understand these family obligations correctly. Please explain to me why your biological son deserves $2 million while your adopted daughter deserves nothing." "You can't record us without permission," Dad snapped, reaching for the phone. I moved it away from his reach. "Actually, Arizona is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. Please continue explaining these." Family obligations. Mom looked between Dad and me, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "Alex, sweetheart, you're twisting this into something it's not. We love you just as much as we love Tyler. This isn't about love." "Then, what is it about?" Dad stepped away from the fireplace, moving into his full intimidation mode. "It's about responsibility to the family name and the business your grandfather built. Tyler is a Chen by blood. You're a Chen by paperwork. There's a difference. And that difference matters when we're talking about preserving a legacy." The words hit exactly as he'd intended them to. But instead of the shame or hurt he was probably expecting, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my father without the filter of daughterly love, without the desperate need to earn his approval, without the constant hope that if I just worked hard enough and proved myself valuable enough, I'd be worthy of unconditional acceptance. "Interesting perspective," I said calmly. "So when Grandpa Bill bounced me on his knee and told me I'd help run the business someday, when he taught me about construction contracts and introduced me to clients as his granddaughter, when he specifically included me in his trust with equal treatment, he was just confused about paperwork." Mom shifted uncomfortably. "Your grandfather was sentimental about you, but he didn't understand the complexities of business succession and family planning the way your father does. Actually, he understood perfectly." I pulled out the copies of Catherine's notes from the original trust meetings. "Would you like to hear what he told his attorney about his wishes for my future? Or should I just read the part where he specifically mentioned that Alex might not share his DNA, but she shares his values?" Dad's face went pale, but his voice remained aggressive. "Where did you get those?" "From Catherine Morrison. You remember her, don't you?"
I do.
"The attorney who handled Grandpa Bill's estate. The one who kept detailed records of every conversation about the trust. The one who's very interested in how you modified a trust without consulting all beneficiaries." "You went to a lawyer?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "I went to Grandpa's lawyer, the one who actually knew his wishes instead of rewriting them to suit your preferences." Dad moved closer, his construction worker's frame suddenly seeming more threatening than protective. "You're making a serious mistake, Alex. You're threatening your own family over money. Is that really who you want to be?" "I'm threatening my family?" I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its bitterness. "You stole my inheritance, lied about my grandfather's wishes, and have spent years treating me like a second-class family member. But I'm the one making threats." "We provided for you," he shot back. "We raised you, educated you, gave you every opportunity. You've had a good life because of our generosity, your generosity." I repeated the phrase slowly. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You adopted me as an infant, raised me to believe I was your daughter, taught me to love this family and this business, encouraged me to help and support everyone around me. And now you want credit for your generosity in not abandoning me. Mom started crying, soft tears that she probably hoped would derail my anger in return. Us to familiar patterns of me comforting her instead of addressing the actual issues. We do love you, Alex. You're our daughter in every way that matters. Except the ways that involve money, inheritance, or actual equality. It's not about equality, Dad insisted. It's about need. Tyler needs financial support because his career path is uncertain. You have a stable job and you've always been responsible with money. You don't need the trust fund the way he does. So my responsibility disqualifies me from my grandfather's gift, but Tyler's irresponsibility qualifies him for mine? Tyler isn't irresponsible. He's pursuing his passion. With whose money, I asked pointedly, because I've been keeping track, and in the last 3 months alone, you funded his studio time, his new equipment, his trip to Nashville, and his daily expenses. Where exactly is that money coming from? The silence stretched between us, heavy with admission. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice quieter, but no less determined. We've been advancing him money against his future trust fund distribution. Ow. Not only did you steal my inheritance, you're spending it early to fund his lifestyle right now. We didn't steal anything, he said sharply. We made practical adjustments to a financial plan that needed updating. I stared at him, marveling at his ability to reframe theft as practical planning. Did you really think I'd never find out? Did you imagine I'd just accept being excluded from Grandpa's legacy without ever asking questions? Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue. We thought you'd understand. You've always been so mature, so practical. We hoped you'd see that Tyler needed the support more than you did. What I see is that you waited until Grandpa Bill died and then betrayed everything he wanted for my future. Dad's expression hardened again. Your grandfather was an old man with outdated ideas about family structure. He didn't understand the legal complexities of adoption and inheritance. We consulted with financial advisors and made the best decisions for everyone involved. Everyone except me. You're being selfish, he said bluntly. You have everything you need. Good job, a nice apartment, a stable life. Tyler is struggling to establish himself in a competitive industry. The money will give him the foundation. He needs to succeed. And what about the foundation I needed? What about the down payment for a house that you told me I should save for myself? What about the graduate school I decided not to pursue because I couldn't afford the tuition? What about the business opportunities I've passed up because I didn't have the capital to invest? Those were choices you made, Mom said defensively. We never told you not to pursue those things. You just made sure I didn't have the resources to pursue them while simultaneously funding Tyler's every whim. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. Here's what's going to happen. You have 30 days to provide a complete accounting of all trust fund modifications, paid, and all money you've advanced to Tyler. You'll also need to explain your legal justification for changing the trust without my knowledge or consent. Dad's face turned red. You're really going to sue your own family? I'm going to honor my grandfather's actual wishes instead of the version you created to justify your favoritism. This will destroy our relationship, Mom said, fresh tears streaming down her face. Current needs being Tyler's expensive lifestyle and my supposed lack of worthiness. Now that's not fair. This isn't about worthiness. It's about practical considerations. Tyler's chosen a career path that requires significant upfront investment, while you've established yourself in a stable profession. The modification simply reflects different financial realities. Different financial realities, I repeated. Is that what we're calling favoritism now? His tone sharpened slightly. Alex, I've known you since you were a little girl. You've always been the sensible one, the one who thinks things through rationally. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment on this. My emotions are perfectly clear, Uncle Marcus. I'm angry that my family stole my inheritance. I'm hurt that they lied to me for years. I'm determined to honor my grandfather's actual wishes instead of the version they invented. Legal action will tear this family apart, he warned. Dropping the pretense of casual concern. Is that really what you want? To destroy relationships over money? The relationships were destroyed when they decided blood was more important than loyalty. After I hung up, I sat in my cubicle surrounded by marketing materials and consumer analytics, trying to process how quickly my family had mobilized. Against me, Cole Marcus, who'd bounced me on his knee at family barbecues and praised my business sense, was now acting as their financial spin doctor. The woman who'd helped plan surprise parties for my birthday was crying to relatives about my supposed betrayal. The brother I'd co-signed loans for was portraying me as money-hungry and vindictive. The isolation campaign intensified over the next few days. Family friends started reaching out with concerned messages about my difficult time, and offers to mediate the family conflict. Each conversation followed the same script: expressions of love and support, gentle suggestions that legal action was extreme, carefully worded implications that my adoption status perhaps gave me unrealistic expectations about inheritance, writes Mrs. Rodriguez, a family friend who'd attended every graduation and birthday party, called with what she clearly believed was helpful perspective. Mia, I know you're upset, but families have conflicts about money all the time. Your parents love you so much, and Tyler needs that financial support to pursue his dreams. Maybe you could find it in your heart to be the bigger person here. The bigger person, I said slowly. You mean the person who accepts being cheated out of their inheritance to maintain family peace? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds harsh. But you've always been so successful, so independent. Tyler is more fragile. He needs the safety net. So my success disqualifies me from my grandfather's gift. I just think that sometimes being the strong one means making sacrifices for the people we love. I ended the call feeling nauseated. This was the narrative they were spreading. Tyler was fragile and deserving. I was strong and selfish. My grandfather's explicit wishes for equal treatment had been erased and replaced with a story about practical family management and my unreasonable expectations. But their propaganda campaign was about to backfire spectacularly, because they'd underestimated both my documentation and Catherine Morrison's thoroughness. The 30-day deadline for financial disclosure was approaching, and my parents' response revealed the true scope of what they'd hidden. The accounting they provided was stunning in its casual criminality. Over the past 2 years, they'd advanced Tyler nearly $300,000 against his trust fund. Studio rental fees, equipment purchases, travel expenses, living costs, even a down payment on a new car. Every receipt was carefully categorized and filed, a paper trail of systematic preference disguised as parental support. More damaging was what they hadn't disclosed initially, but Catherine's investigation uncovered through banking records and business filings. My parents had been using trust fund assets as collateral for business loans, effectively gambling with both Tyler's and my inheritance to fund construction projects. They'd also transferred ownership of several rental properties from the trust directly to Tyler's name, claiming the transfers were early distributions that wouldn't affect the final payout. Catherine called me into her office to review the findings, her expression grim. Alex, this goes far beyond simple favoritism. Your parents have been treating the trust fund as their personal lending institution. If their business investments fail, both you and Tyler could lose everything. She spread the financial documents across her conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. They violated their fiduciary duty as trustees in multiple ways. The unauthorized advances, the use of trust assets as loan collateral, the property transfers without beneficiary consent, any one of these could invalidate their trustee status. What does that mean practically? It means we can petition the court to remove them as trustees and appoint an independent administrator. It also means we can demand immediate restoration of all misappropriated funds plus interest and penalties. I stared at the numbers, calculating not just the financial impact, but the emotional devastation this would cause. My parents had risked everything on the assumption that I'd never discover their manipulation, or, if I did, that I'd be too loyal to take action against them. There's something else, Catherine continued, pulling out another set of documents. I contacted the bank that holds their business loans. When they used trust assets as collateral, they signed documents stating they had unanimous beneficiary consent. That's fraud, Alex. Criminal fraud. The word hung in the air between us. Criminal fraud. My parents hadn't just betrayed my trust or shown favoritism. They'd committed crimes using my inheritance as the weapon. What are my options? We can pursue civil remedies through probate court, seeking restoration of funds and removal of your parents as trustees. Or we can report the fraud to the district attorney and let criminal prosecutors handle it. Or both. I thought about my mother crying at family gatherings, my father's pride in the business he'd inherited from Grandpa Bill, Tyler's complete ignorance of the criminal activity funding his lifestyle. These people had raised me, loved me in their conditional way, and now I had the power to destroy their lives as thoroughly as they'd attempted to erase my future. I want them to face consequences, I said finally. I want Tyler to understand. What they did in his name? Catherine nodded approvingly. Before we file anything, we should give Tyler an opportunity to distance himself from this. He received the stolen assets, but he may not have known they were obtained through fraud. If he cooperates and agrees to asset restoration, we might be able to limit the criminal exposure to your parents. That evening, I called Tyler directly. Go intermediaries. No family politics. Just a conversation between siblings about the theft that had been committed in his name. Tyler, we need to talk about the trust fund. His voice was immediately defensive. Alex, I already told Mom and Dad I don't want to be in the middle of this family drama. This isn't family drama. It's criminal fraud. Silence. I have documentation showing that Mom and Dad have stolen nearly $500,000 from the trust fund over the past 2 years. They've used trust assets as collateral for business loans, transferred properties directly to your name without legal authority, and signed documents claiming they had my consent for activities I knew nothing about. That's impossible. It wouldn't, Tyler. I have bank records. I have transfer documents. I have receipts for every studio session, every piece of equipment, every expense they've covered for you using money that was supposed to be split between us. Another long silence. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice smaller than I'd heard since we were children. I believe you. But now you do know, and you have a choice. You can work with me to restore the trust to its original structure and hold them accountable for what they've done. Or you can stand by while they face criminal prosecution for fraud. Criminal prosecution? They committed felonies, Tyler. Using trust assets as loan collateral with forged beneficiary consent is fraud. Transferring trust properties without legal authority is theft. The district attorney takes financial crimes against vulnerable populations very seriously. Hear him breathing heavily, probably running his hands through his hair the way he did when overwhelmed. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell the truth. I want you to acknowledge that you received assets that weren't legally yours to receive. And I want you to support restoring the trust to Grandpa Bill's original vision of equal treatment. And if I do that, then maybe we can handle this as a family matter instead of a criminal case. The next morning, Tyler called back with his decision. His voice was shaky but determined. Alex, I've been thinking all night. I want to do the right thing. I'll work with your lawyer to return everything and set up the trust the way Grandpa wanted it. That phone call marked the beginning of the end for my parents' carefully constructed justifications. Tyler's cooperation would soon force them to confront the reality that their crimes had consequences. Their manipulation had limits, and their adopted daughter was no longer willing to sacrifice her future for their comfort. Ow. The settlement conference took place on a crisp December morning in Catherine Morrison's office. My parents arrived looking older than I'd ever seen them, their faces etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from months of legal pressure and family destruction. Tyler sat beside me, having chosen accountability over complicity, while our lawyers negotiated the restoration of my grandfather's true legacy. The terms were straightforward. The trust would be restructured to reflect Grandpa Bill's original wishes, equal distribution between both grandchildren. All assets transferred illegally to Tyler would be returned to the trust. My parents would step down as trustees, replaced by an independent financial institution. They would also repay all misappropriated funds with interest, effectively costing them their retirement savings and forcing the sale of their Scottsdale home. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the fraud, allowing them to avoid prison time but not the financial consequences of their actions. As I signed the settlement documents, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace, not revenge, not vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing my grandfather's wishes would finally be honored. 6 months later, I used part of my restored inheritance to purchase a small construction consultancy firm. Building on the business knowledge Grandpa Bill had taught me and the marketing expertise I'd developed independently. Tyler, having learned the difference between earned success and handed privilege, invested his portion in a legitimate music education program while working part-time to support himself. My parents moved to a modest apartment and began the slow process of rebuilding their lives without the financial cushion they'd stolen from their children. We exchange holiday cards now, polite but distant. The relationship forever changed by their choices and my refusal to enable them. The most unexpected outcome was discovering my own strength. For years, I defined myself as the helpful daughter, the responsible one, the person who solved everyone else's problems. But standing up for my grandfather's memory and my own worth taught me that love without respect is just manipulation, and family without equality is just biology. Sometimes people ask if I regret the legal action, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is simple. I regret that it was necessary, but I'll never regret honoring the man who saw me as his true granddaughter when my own parents saw me as a temporary charity case. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.